8 Brookdale students and 2 faculty leaders experienced short-term study abroad courses in statistics and environmental science in Bermuda. They studied alongside a team of researchers and scientists at BIOS, the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences facility in Ferry Reach, Bermuda.
So I just wanted to introduce the students and introduce our trip first, and then the students are going to talk to you about their experience and also talk to you about some of the great work that they did. And I was saying to the ladies in the office yesterday, we were moving mountains yesterday getting this presentation ready earlier than we expected to, but the students worked really, really hard, and we were in the classroom from 9 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night when we were in Bermuda. Not always in the classroom. We went out to the water several times as well, but they worked really hard, and they even asked for some downtime. These 20-year-olds asking, can we please have some downtime? We're done. We're so done. So they did work really hard these past 6 weeks. All right, so we went to BIOS, which is in Bermuda. It is a biological station. It's the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences. It's a research facility, and there are essentially dorms there, some that have air conditioning and some that don't. We were lucky. We got air conditioning and we had private bathrooms. We were lucky. All right, that was good. So this is a picture of BIOS that you see over here. They have a giant cafeteria down here and a giant boat that they go out and do research on. They have little boats too that we actually used. And this is one of their instructors. You see our students' legs here in the water here. They found a baby sea cucumber, sea slug. All righty, yep. And you took that picture, didn't you, Maggie? Yes. All right. All right, they enjoyed that day. They have a lot of great staff. This is Caitlin Baird. She was the education director there, and she helped us put our program together. And these are the students with the 2 educators that took us out on our trip to identify coral and fish. They took us out on all of our trips. All right, we got there, and the first thing we did was dump our bags, grab our snorkeling gear, and go down about a mile to a place that's called Whalebone Bay. And we snorkeled for the first time, which was great because some folks had to get used to snorkeling. Make sure that your mask didn't leak. Make sure that your flippers were working okay. Decide if you want to use flippers and those kinds of things. And the girls found a little friend. I don't know if you can see him right here in the picture. He's a little white ceramic or plastic dog. You just found him, right? Yeah, and he's in all of their photos, essentially. I know. He went snorkeling with them. He dove down under the water with them. He pointed out fish for them. Yes. So a little bit about Bermuda. Bermuda is the tip of a volcano that's a little bit underwater. So this actually here is the land area that you see, and this other stuff is under the water and you don't see it. All of these like yellow things here, and these are the names of many, many shipwrecks that are around Bermuda, and they didn't see the underwater island part. They shipwrecked. But that gave us a great piece of reef, essentially, to look at. They're not reefs, but this is a piece of a shipwreck that has the fish located on it. Here's a piece of a ship sticking up there, coral starting to grow there, and that's happening all over the place. This photo was taken at this, how do you say that name? Pelion? Pelion. I always have a hard time with that word. And the little black and white fish there, the Sergeant Major, our students took that photo while they were snorkeling. They would dive down and take photos. So I thought that was a great thing for you to take a look at. We also snorkeled and found this coral and life in the coral, also taken on the same day that we went to the Pelion shipwreck location. Then the students analyzed coral from randomly selected shots on reefs. They did a reef identification and a lagoon identification. So they identified what types of coral were on these, and that's depicted over there in their posters and their work, and they'll tell you about that. And then here is a lagoon. So the different types of items that are prevalent there are not the same that's on the reef. So the lagoon and the reef have different materials in them. That's what the students were noticing. And so here we are after our fish observation, coming back from our trip, and you see us. I was thinking that the pilots were in there too, but they're not. They were great. All right, so we have a couple of great pictures of fish also taken by the students, but it was very interesting. They are going to tell you that all of their data for fish is not like each other's data for fish. And the reason for that is they didn't see the same things. Not that the same things weren't there, but that was part of data collection, and they learned that as part of their statistics. We got better. Okay, they got to compare what they saw to what experts see and what novices see. Some of our groups were placing in between, so like a little bit better than novices because they were educated. Here we go. Then they identified they took an analysis of what they saw there. Then we went to take a look at plankton and talk about how important plankton was. It's all coming from the educators that we were exposed to there. These photos were taken from the microscopes in the lab after we did a plankton tow. There's a computer that's connected to microscopes, and the girls took these photos, and they had to draw these little plankton and identify who they were. So that was quite a bit of a learning. And there they are in the lab, looking under their microscopes, drawing and identifying their plankton. They also did a day in the lab where they talked about seawater and watched how it flowed differently. They're going to talk about how the water flows. What's that called? Thermohaline circulation. Okay. Oh, and this was a middle of the night adventure. We had a couple of, lab geeks. We had 3 lab geeks, actually, just 2 of them in the picture. And they snuck out and found shiny plankton and collected plankton and looked at it. I don't know where their teacher was that night. No, I was with them. They did not sneak out. All right. So the data that we collected was officially collected through these Niskin bottles, which the students will tell you about. And Bermuda has the longest ocean chemical makeup collection in the world. So we have very good data to work with there, and that's what we analyzed. We took a look at many ocean properties, relating them all to depth. They'll tell you why we chose depth, and discovered how that relates to temperature, to fluorescence, and to salinity, and they know why those things are important in the water. They talk about the distribution of the temperatures and the distribution of the salinity in there, and why salinity is important, or too much salinity is not good for our environment. Then we also talked a little bit about invasive species. There's a lionfish problem in our coastal waters, and it's prevalent down there in Bermuda as well. And so this data was collected over many years and in different locations, and they noticed there's some changing going on there, and the students will tell you about why the lionfish are bad and how they're growing and what we noticed about their changing in locations. And there's a group of our students after a snorkeling expedition, not wanting to get on the boat yet, okay, with their dog in the water. Yep. In addition to this, there are lots of things that is being studied other than ocean life at BIOS. They study air quality, they study air currents, and also ocean currents. And this is a picture of Superstorm Sandy here on our New Jersey coast. They were watching that, monitoring that, and they were part of that whole science tracking of Superstorm Sandy. So it's related to right here in our own home. And actually, the Caitlin Baird is from New Jersey. She's from northern New Jersey. Then she got her degree at NYU and Cornell, and then has been working down in BIOS for a long time. So we have that nice hometown-ish connection to BIOS. All right, so I'm going to stop this and put this just back on the front in case somebody wants to refer to it again. So I'm going to turn the time over to our students and just let them talk about their experience a little bit. And then they have data and information they want to share with you, what they've learned so far. And you got a chance to ask them any questions you want to about their experience, about environmental science, about statistics. All righty? So these are our students.
It was quite tiring. We had to wake up like 7:45 was breakfast, which some people didn't attend because it was so early. And then we had lecture every day at 9. We just had a really packed day. Then we'd have lunch, and then we'd go out into the water. Sometimes we're in the boat, sometimes we weren't. It was just nonstop every day, but it was very exciting. Yes.
You just want me to talk about an experience as well? Yes. It was actually a very interesting and exciting experience being able to see the coastal waters of Bermuda itself and how well it's been preserved and maintained throughout the years, as well as how it differs from our waters, considering the fact that it's also off the coast of South Carolina, which is surprisingly different since each one has a different current that goes through it. But was probably the most interesting thing with me, it was more of just the culture itself. And that really interesting was more of just the cultural aspect of it, seeing how their culture was different than ours, their architecture, their different forms of dialect, their different ways of communication. I mean, we were able to meet different people that all had different life experiences that living through there.
Yeah, so I was a business major throughout my career at Brookdale, but I decided it wasn't for me. And I took environmental science in high school, and that kind of sparked my interest a little bit, and I really liked that class. And so then when I went to Bermuda, I said, oh, this is what I want to do. Thank you.
Here you go.
Yes, similarly to Celine, this Bermuda trip definitely helped me decide what I wanted to do. This was my first year at Brookdale, and I went in wanting to do biology. And I didn't know if I wanted to do genetics or marine biology because I had interest in both. And throughout this trip, it was amazing experiencing the coast of Bermuda and seeing all of the projects that the interns did there. One intern was doing a project with coral reef restoration, and he was so proud of his little corals that were growing. And I really got to talk to the people who were doing the work there, and it helped me decide that I want to go into marine biology. So also I will be applying for an internship in Bermuda for next summer through BIOS. So I'm really excited for that. This trip definitely helped me figure out what I want to do and really sparked the interest. So yeah. Caitlin?
So I'm not a science major. Science has never really interested me or anything. But it wasn't until we went to Bermuda and I actually got to go out and experience it. And when we had lectures in the morning and we learned about the different fish, and then we went out and snorkeled and I actually got to see it with my own eyes, the fish that we're learning about and the coral, that's when it really affected me. And I was like, wow, like this actually interests me. And I never had that up until this trip. So if it wasn't for this trip, I don't know if I would be interested in some of the environmental issues that exist. So, yeah.
Like Celine said before, I also took environmental science in high school, and it is very interesting, but it was cool to actually dive in and do hands-on work, and from the math point of view, you actually got to interpret your work, and it made everything make sense, which was just awesome to be there firsthand and really experience all of it. And also, no one mentioned yet, but the food was really good. So it's probably my favorite part. But it was an amazing experience, definitely.
I thought it was just interesting because I'm not a biology major. And I just thought it was interesting that we live near the beach, so I wanted to go somewhere that, like, we could learn more about, like, the issues going on in the world. And I really learned a lot. So.
I'm not a biology major either. So for me, going on this trip, it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Everyone was so friendly, so nice. Everyone at BIOS was so happy to meet us, happy to show us around, tell us about everything. So it just really opened my eyes to everything that you could see just traveling. So it was awesome.
I think definitely, even if people aren't, to advertise it, aren't biology majors, definitely to go on. Because like I said, Caitlin, if you want to say your quote when we went plankton diving and she collected her own data.
This is what it's like to like science. Like,
yeah.
This is when we went the night snorkel to see bioluminescence that the plankton produce. And it was the strongest because it was the full moon. And when we went back to the lab and we had our own like homemade plankton tow, which is basically where you collect plankton and you analyze it under the microscope. It wasn't until then that I was like, this is so interesting. And if anyone else can experience this that isn't a science major, like, that would be awesome. So I guess that's what I would say. Like, even if it isn't part of your major, you should go ahead and experience it.
Definitely.
Not just with the science part, but with the math part. I mean, because I know, yes, because I know a lot of people, math isn't their favorite subject. So I think if you're not really much of a math person, it just makes it so much more interesting than if you just took a normal statistics class and you're just sitting there. It's just not the same experience. It's like you're really putting the math into action instead of just sitting in the classroom and learning about it. So when I usually go into museums and I usually read the cards, but like the next day it doesn't really quite affect me this in the same way the next day. But this trip like really helped put everything together and reinforced everything for me.
Yeah, going back to the advertising, definitely just was that getting students even no matter their major, and it was definitely a great deal from Brookdale. I personally took the 8 credits, so I took the 2 classes. Not everyone did that because they had maybe taken the class before, but it's definitely a great deal to be able to go out of the country, experience that, and get credits at the same time. And it's a great resume builder, too. I'd say especially for people who were interested in this, putting that on the resume that you went to Bermuda and studied at a lab research base, the BIOS. It's definitely really looks good on that for your future jobs and internships.
This is also, like Professor Weiss said, my second time doing study abroad. I went to Iceland last summer for English 122, and it's just so different when you're physically putting yourself out there and taking all this information and seeing it up close. And especially, too, we're young. We should be traveling as much as we can, and Brookdale offers, like, you can go to any other school and you probably won't get the kind of deals that we get here. Like, it's just what we offer here is you don't find everywhere. So I would definitely recommend it to anyone. Absolutely.
It's so much easier to take when you have the hands-on experience. We literally got our feet wet in environmental science and statistics, so it wasn't as boring. Some people get bored in the classroom just doing graphs, but having a real-life experience to connect to it definitely makes it more exciting. But I don't think any of us here want to be statisticians, but we will definitely use statistics if we go into any science field. Don't say it too early.
I'm going to say something. Okay. Stand up here by this beautiful lady. I emphasize in the classroom that we were having a working use of statistics in this course, and the students applied the statistics they learned in the classroom to the data that they collected while they were in Bermuda, and they also looked at their graphs and their conclusions in their environmental science book, which helped them see that some of their bar graphs, etc., in their textbook were made from Excel, just like the ones they made on the computer in BIOS. And they talked about confidence intervals in the classroom. We read a little episode about confidence intervals in the environmental science textbook, and their environmental science professor, Dr. Goulet, says it's just too bad they couldn't have all the statistics before they even took environmental science. They could understand this book better, but they were picking up things in their environmental science text that they couldn't have really understood as well without having the statistics to go along with it. But the students, although they may not want to be statisticians in any field, nursing, education, marketing, they got to use statistics. So now they see, oh, no matter what I do, I've got statistics in my life. And it's not that bad as long as it's a working use of statistics, right? Even actresses might have to use statistics. We had an actress in our group who kept us in song most every day. But I just wanted to say how proud I am of the students. Many of them had never had statistics before, and I could see them listening to what I was saying and applying it and they learned. I could tell they didn't know this yesterday, and now they know this today. And that was a big deal. That's a big deal to me as an educator. And I don't know, they don't recognize it yet, but I think they will recognize that they learned much more than they think they have right now. Some of them, at least. That's true. So there were other aspects about the trip that I thought was very good for our students. The students were tired, but when I said, come on, let's get in the water, they come on and got in the water. And they said, oh, cool, look at this. Oh, cool, look at that. And they were always strong. They were good swimmers. They were healthy. And I was very pleased with all of that stuff. They gave us good feedback. Sometimes tired, but they gave us good feedback. Yeah, that's good. So we know that Bermuda is a little bitty island, and they have to use their resources sparingly. So we did not waste food. We did not waste water. Do you guys want to talk about how that might have changed you at all? I know. Go ahead, Caitlin.
So before going to Bermuda, I mean, I took long showers. That's inevitable. But going to Bermuda, I learned that they collect rainwater and they have to use it sparingly. They can't just run water all day. So when I came back from Bermuda, I was very conscious of how long my showers were, and I realized, like, I should not be wasting so much water, you know. I could take a quick shower. So I think that was really important to learn. Like, water's so important in this earth, and we don't have endless amounts of it, so.
Professor Ray was saying how we didn't waste food. At the cafeteria there, that you're saying the food was wonderful, the chefs were amazing, and they had a compost bucket. So at the end of the meal, you would put all of your scraps into the compost bucket, and then they would compost it. I believe they used it for soil and fertilizer and things like that. So definitely no waste there, very environmentally conscious place. And I don't know if anyone here uses compost at home. I know I do, and it's definitely a great thing to do, to use what you can to make the best of it. So.
Everything was hand washed.
All the dishes were hand washed.
Oh, and I'd also like to add something else about the water is I tend to unconsciously like leave the water on while I'm brushing my teeth, and now like when I'm just brushing, I just turn the water off until I'm ready to, rinse. Because I don't think we realize how much water we waste even just brushing our teeth.
The difference between this and the previous study is that we were joined with environmental science. So we had our professor from environmental science with us, and the students could more readily tie statistics to a purpose, which was their environmental science course. I think that's the biggest difference. We analyzed fish and coral and algae and plankton and those types of things, which students did before, but we had, I think, a more in-depth and a more professional understanding of those things this time.
Well, the sea life there is a very diverse one, especially compared to most of the Atlantic Ocean, more like the Caribbean, due to the fact that it's still having the same type of waters within there. But it is that most species you'll see would probably be like wrasses, parrotfish. We actually got a glimpse of a pretty uncommon one known as a trumpetfish, which you saw or will see within a couple of our posters. But there is a problem right now, is that there is an invasive species of lionfish living there, which we will talk about more in depth later. But just to give you a summarized version of it, is that it's causing problems by eating all of like the smaller species, such as the smaller wrasses and juvenile fish. So, but the biodiversity there is very unique, especially for especially within the Atlantic Ocean, especially within the geography of where it is. Considering the fact that if you mostly go within the coast of like South Carolina, you would probably just mostly find the same type of fish that you would find maybe around here. It's the fact of it having colder waters.
Over here we have our poster of the reefs and fish. we went to one of the reefs, North Rock Reef in Bermuda. And in there, we had 20 minutes to go and identify as many fish as we could, which was really cool. We had our little identification cards, and we were studying them at breakfast before that, trying to make sure that we could identify as much as we could. So we have our chart here. The largest amount of fish that we saw were the yellow-headed wrasse, and they're pictured here with the blue-headed wrasse. Yellow-headed wrasse are females, and blue-headed are males. And it was really hard because there were so many fish, but we devised a system to count them where we realized that when our lecture earlier in that day, they told us that the yellow-headed wrasse, the females, school around the males, the blue-headed wrasse. So there were lots of schools around, and it was hard to be able to count each one. So what I did was I looked and I counted one school, and I counted about 20 yellow-headed wrasse. So then I decided that for each blue-headed wrasse I saw, there was that school with them. So I multiplied however many blue-headed wrasse I saw by 20 for the yellow-headed wrasse to get that count. And that was one of the things Professor Ray was saying. We got to compare that to a database, and that was the only fish that we identified that was in between novice and expert. So that system worked, and it was really cool to see, like, okay, so there are ways to devise and see in the field to get better data. Everyone had different data of fish. Some people were better at identifying others. So we would say it's not the most reliable, but we were still learning in that if we went out again, our data would probably be closer to the experts. So yeah, if you guys want to say anything about it.
I just wanted to say that it was a lot harder than it looked because when you're out there snorkeling and the fish swim pretty fast, so they all look kind of similar in the water. So we had the lecture in the morning, and I was like, is it this fish or this fish? You had to write on this notepad, and it was like really hard to like write it down and then look and like, oh, where did the fish go? So it was just very hard for me, but Maggie did a great job and her partner. So that was a really cool opportunity. Do you want to say anything?
Sure. What I also thought was very interesting is that when you're snorkeling in the Bermuda water, you're a lot less afraid than you would be snorkeling off the coast of New Jersey because you can't really see anything here, but you could see everything. I mean, we would be yards away from each other, and I could identify Maggie like perfectly, or I could identify Cynthia. Like, it was amazing, and you weren't really scared. Like, I don't know what it was, but I guess it was because you could see everything, so you'd know something was coming your way. But it was nice to just not have any fear. And
not sure exactly how deep. Definitely was. We couldn't touch where we were snorkeling, so we went out. One of the reefs we went to, the one where we identified the fish, was 9 miles offshore. So it was really offshore, but it was very secluded and beautiful. And that's where we saw the wrasse and also the parrotfish over here. Just wanted to say, what we were learning about the parrotfish, they're beautiful, blue, very vibrant. On a poster here, we have the female stoplight parrotfish. And like birds and other animals that you see in New Jersey, females aren't as colorful. So these were red with like brownish scales. And then the males were the most beautiful. They had the very vibrant blue and yellow and pinks in them. And one really interesting thing about the parrotfish that we learned is that the queen parrotfish, they actually blow a mucus bubble around them when they're sleeping. And that mucus bubble helps to hide the scent of them from predators. So I just thought that was like really fascinating that you didn't know that going to it. It's a really cool adaptation that they have. We also saw trumpetfish, which Peter was talking about, really long one. We only saw one, and everyone's data saw one. So that was pretty cool. That was one thing that was consistent throughout the group. And blue tangs, as people know, Dory from Finding Nemo, saw a lot of blue tangs too. And we had another lab where we were identifying different corals with the coral identification program. And one of the most common corals was the mustard hill coral. It's like a yellowish color. And brain coral, yeah. Brain coral.
Do you want to talk about bioluminescence? Yeah, do you want to talk about that? Okay. So me, Maggie, and Celine, actually, that night that the picture was taken on the slide, it was a full moon, so the bioluminescence of the plankton was the strongest. And I think there's some pictures. So basically, we did like a homemade plankton tow where I took like a water bottle and I swam like 30 yards. And then when we went back to the lab, we went under the microscope and then we noticed that some of them were still active. So that was really cool how I was able to collect that data. I don't know. I felt like a scientist for once. I was so excited about it. Yeah. Oh yeah, in order for the light, we had to move our arms and legs as fast as we can. It only lasts about a second, but it's so cool. It's kind of like fireflies, would you describe it? Like the light, it's just millions of fireflies, kind of. So it's really cool.
I just wanted to add one more thing about the snorkeling. It just like Maggie said about Finding Dory and Finding Nemo, like it literally felt like that. Like the water was so clear and you could see like all the colorful coral. I was like, wow, I'm like in a movie.
Yeah, so the fluorescence of the plankton, it's actually called the hazard effect, and we actually learned that in one of our lectures earlier. So basically when a predator is coming or there's a big move in the water, all of the plankton will light up at the same time to try to show the predator that they're bigger than they are. So they're all trying to basically kind of scare it away and save themselves. So there is a biological reason that they light up. So when we were underwater, like Caitlin said, it was a lot harder to see it than we thought because you see in like documentaries, they're just everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, if you had to really, we tried different things. First, they said, oh, kick. So we were like kicking in the water. That didn't really work. And then we figured if you clap underwater, because getting that pressure and the friction, definitely, it gets the hazard effect. It's only for like a split second. But one of the things I'll always remember is there was a little tiny blue light that just went up. And it was just incredible to see that, like, you can see the plankton. Because normally in your water, you don't realize that you're swimming with plankton. So it was definitely a really awesome experience that we got to see that night. Here in New Jersey, there's a lot of murky water because of upwelling and the algae in the sands. But down up in Bermuda, or down, it's a lot more biodiverse. So there's less gunk to say in the water. But when we were snorkeling at North Reef, the scientist there was telling us that it was the clearest that she's ever seen it this summer. So we got really lucky that day. Yeah.
We noticed that there's a negative correlation between the temperature and the depth. So as the temperature decreases, as the temperature gets colder, it gets deeper. Yeah, it gets deeper. So the warmest was at 20 degrees, which you might think it's cold, but that's actually in Celsius. It's actually about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the water in Bermuda is mostly in the 60 to 70 degree range.
So, yeah, we didn't go too deep. Actually, the lionfish we were talking about were really deep. They're about 200 meters deep, so we couldn't go that far. But relating to your question, with the depths and the biodiversity, in the shallower areas, there's more biodiversity and more colorful fish because there's a lot of phytoplankton, and phytoplankton use the sun to make their own food. So where you see more phytoplankton, you're going to see a lot more colorful fish and a lot more colorful corals as well. And speaking of corals, a big thing that's happening around the world is coral bleaching. And coral bleaching is a really big problem. So basically the coral is a symbiotic and mutual relationship between the coral polyp itself and algae. So the algae lives inside the coral and it uses it as protection. And when the temperatures rise or there's pollutants in the water, the corals get stressed and they'll release the algae out. So they'll expel it because they're stressed and they can't handle that relationship. And that's what causes coral bleaching. So the algae is released, and the algae is what gives the corals their bright colors. So once it's released, the coral is white, and it's not necessarily dead, but it doesn't function how it normally should. So that's a big problem happening in reefs everywhere, including the Great Barrier Reef. And it's because of climate change, the temperature is stressing the corals out as well as the pollutants.
That's what I was going to say. I don't know why we use the systems, the metric systems that we do. And we just want to be different, I guess. But yeah, it was nice to work with, 1 zeros and everything. It was, it made sense. For sure.
Yeah, the United States is the only country that uses Fahrenheit and inches and things like that. It would be great if we could switch to metric. I know they had, but people are so used to that now, it's hard to. But in all science across the world, they use the metric system. So if you're going to be a scientist, you got to get used to the metric system. But it is simpler because it's based on tens and hundreds. And another big thing about like going in the water, it was easier to visualize because 1 meter, I just think of a meter stick and how far down that would be. So definitely the metric system. I think that if we could get used to it, it would be a lot easier. I think the only thing was like the temperature because we're used to saying like, oh, it's 60 or 70 here and it's 20 degrees Celsius. And you hear 20 degrees as an American and you're like, that's freezing. But really, it was warm. So, yeah. Yeah, so the data collection ourselves, like we said, our data, especially with the fish, isn't the most reliable. It was our first time doing that. But the coral data, how we collected that was BIOS uses a coral identification program. So basically, they have pictures of a certain reef, 10 images, and the computer generates dots that will go randomly on that image. And then what we did was we looked at whatever the dot landed on and said, was that a hard coral, algae, soft coral, bare rock, rubble, sand? So that was a lot easier to do than having to rely on ourselves just swimming and doing it. Also, a big thing at BIOS is that their data collection they've been doing for over 50 years with the Niskin bottles you saw in the presentation. That's been happening. It's the longest research study in the ocean so far, so they've been doing that forever. And I believe in our data set there were 629 data entries. So 604, thank you. She's good memory. Yeah, so we were able to use that, and that was the most reliable data because it's been happening for over 50 years. Yep, 1950s, and so that's what our charts over here are from. So that's the most reliable because it has been in such a long span, and we've been able to see over the years the changes. Yeah.
What the students are saying here is they had some experience collecting data. They realized their data was not perfectly reliable because they're not experts. However, we used some other data where they had to analyze from a random sample. So they were like in between using some data provided to them and collecting it themselves. But then they had other data that was previously collected by real scientists. So they had this different reliability scale, if you will say, for what they worked on. So we all talked about how important it is to have good data. And so we got some experience with some unreliable data and some very reliable data. I think that was an important aspect of the course.
Well, how they collect it, it's a little bit fuzzy with me, but if I remember correctly, it would be, they would do is to add the Niskin bottle to a certain depth, and then followed by that, collect the water through from pressurizing the bottle itself when it releases. As soon as collect that, and then seals off, as it has to have a certain amount of liquid that is supposed to be within it. And they use that and they analyze everything that's been going on through there. That's how we get all of our different data for our different statistical variables such as our temperature, fluorescence, oxygen levels, everything like that. So that way is that since they've been doing it for 50 years, they've been doing deeper and deeper as the technology allows them to actually go deeper. So so with like each advancement of the Niskin bottle, they're able to go a lot deeper, and I mean they're able to reach maybe right now nearly like the end. I'd say around. Sorry, I wasn't really. Thank you. 1,200 meters, which is really, really down. That's I want to say nearly about almost a kilometer and a half down, if I want to say it like that. I'm not entirely sure. I'm a human. I can make mistakes. What do I look like, a supercomputer? Yeah, that's not the point, though. No, but it still goes very deep down where it's able to collect a lot more different variations of the variable itself, where you can see within our charts, as you see with, sorry, I gotta move this. As you see with mine is that since mine is a cubic polynomial nonlinear linear equation in a sense, what you see here is that when you see it at a certain depth, let's say around 800 meters with my oxygen level, you see that it's very, very poor and very low. The lowest point is actually 144 U moles per kilogram. Where you see right here at the end where it gets to the highest, around 1,200 meters, is the highest it will be, which is the maximum value of 399.33, which we counted through the BATS data system. Is that you see is there's different fluctuation with the oxygen of itself. You see same thing with fluorescence as you see within the 200 meters. Well, before the 200 meters, where you see it's higher, where the highest point is 0.175 RFU. I know that sounds bad, but that's how it really is supposed to say it. I'm not sure how you're really supposed to say it. I don't really study fluorescence that much. That's not my expertise. But then again, that's not the point. Is that, as you see, is that it fluctuates than it really does within the depths itself. Though really that can be explained due to the fact of the coral only able to live within 150 meters, since that's the lowest it can be for it to actually have photosynthetic properties, as you see with most algae, phytoplankton such as diatoms, as well as various other photosynthetic synthetic plants and animals. Well, mostly protists. That's not the point, though. But as soon as you start getting down, it actually starts, evening it out. It starts to be like equating to like zero in a sense. I know it's not absolute zero, as it's supposed to be like rounded up in a sense, but it's able to stagnate within that certain point. That's what it usually stagnates within most most organisms that are not photosynthetic.
All right, so we talked a lot about temperature in Bermuda, and we found that, I don't know if you can see right in here, there's patterns of water, actually on the back of this, I can kind of show. It just like there's streams of water that come through and out, and they carry eddies, and it carries the water in a spiral motion, and it brings it around Bermuda to keep the water nice and warm. That's how they have like their vast coral and fish and everything. And Cynthia will talk a little bit more about it, but that's what keeps the water warm. It keeps it circulating, and we found it to be very evident when we found our data in Bermuda.
Yeah, so there's this thing that is called thermohaline circulation, and it's currents that happen everywhere in the ocean, and it is all the way at the very top to the very deep down. And it's due to the difference in water density, meaning thermo is the temperature, and haline means salt. So this, like an example of this could be in the Earth's polar regions, where it's very cold. When it forms ice, the salt doesn't freeze. So the surrounding water gets saltier, and it actually sinks due to the density. So it's getting pulled and replaced by the sinking water. This is beginning at the deep ocean currents, and this could be a form of like precipitation and runoff and ice melting, which increases the density, but evaporation and ice formation enhances the salinity.
And we also found with the fish, coming back to temperature as well, that the fish that we saw, have untrained eyes, so we only caught certain fish when we were looking. So Cynthia and I actually weren't very good at it. We tried, but we ended up doing just descriptions, trying to figure out what fish we did see and what we didn't see. And we noticed that a lot more of the fish that we would see were in certain spots. We would dive down without like our snorkel on and just our goggles, and we'd find different fish than as we were at the top. So we found that just the difference in the depth and the temperature of the water and how warm it was at the top, and the deeper you went, it got a little bit colder. So it definitely changed what you did see.
But the lionfish, of course, is with invasive species such as the stink bugs within here, fire ants, killer bees, everything like that. But what it is that the reason that they're even in the water to begin with was because of exotic pet trade, where a lot of people kept them as exotic pets within tanks, usually kept them by themselves, gave them food, everything like that. A couple storms come in, they accidentally releases them to the water. Next thing you know, they kind of grow rapidly for two factors. Actually, three technically. One is the perfect temperature for them, because they live within the Southeast Pacific. You know, within the Indonesia, Australian coast, as well as going as west as Madagascar itself, which is surprising, really. But it's they're able to live. They live in warm waters, and Bermuda and the Caribbeans, as you all know, are very warm. Number two is an abundance of food. They're able to eat a lot more prey than they normally would within their home within the Southwest Pacific, as well as the Indian Ocean, as there is like more like prey that are not like known as predators. They're just sitting around. And number three, and this is the biggest reason why there's such a huge explosion and a problem: no natural predators. No animal that usually would predate on it would actually be able to eat it. Some animals that try to eat it may have had a problem, considering the fact that lionfish are known to be poisonous species, hence their Latin name, pterois. Man's not wiping this out because fish, like any other non-mammalian species in a sense, or even most mammalian species, produce a lot of young. And I mean a lot. I'm talking clouds of sperm and clouds of eggs, which can reach to tens of thousands, maybe even more.
Yeah, so we were in one of our lectures, they were telling us how each lionfish produces about 3 million eggs per year. So that is just, try to even think about that. It's such a big number. And yeah, so they have the poisonous spikes. There's 13 poisonous spikes on the top of the fish, and that can hurt people. Like we said, there's no natural predators. There is a program at BIOS, which they're doing, and they're trying to collect data on how many lionfish there are, as well as they're going out and spearing the lionfish and killing them because there's such a big issue. Like I said, there's no natural predators. So they're actually also working with local restaurants in Bermuda to try to get restaurants to cook lionfish, to advertise it and get more people interested in buying and eating it, so that there is incentive for people to go out and spear them and try to get the population down. Unfortunately, like they were telling us, that there's no really way to wipe them out completely, but they are trying, and they have programs if they're working with recreational people as well to get those fish and spear them. They have competitions and things like that. So. Yeah, they're overeating, and they actually are getting diseases, liver disease, and because they're eating so much, they're overeating. That's one thing that may help get the population down, but yeah, they're just eating so much. Another thing that they were telling us about is that the different places are trying different ways to combat the lionfish. Some have tried to train sharks to eat lionfish, but it wasn't successful.
Oh, lionfish are more of an ambush. They're solitary hunters, lone wolves in a sense, where they do is they have a selected territory in which they try to eat other prey. Is that you'll never really see a group of lionfish together. Mm-hmm. The only time you'll see it was probably during spawning, since it's not really for them productive to actually go hunt in groups, considering the fact that their species tend to be a lot smaller and they're not actually mobile. They're not mobile, like I said. They're ambush predators, like you see with most anglers, various groupers as well, where you don't see them going as fast, but you see them just going a little bit slowly and then suck up their prey like that.
Actually, not to be rude, but yeah, they actually are in groups. They were showing us photos and pictures of how when they were going and collecting and counting and spearing them, they are in groups. They, like I said, they will hunt on their own, but they tend to be in groups in the same area. So you're not going to just find one in like a really long area. You'll find groups and clusters of them. And we have in our data how they changed from how many we saw in different areas. From 2012 to 2016. 2012, how many they saw in total was about 81. And then going into 2016 was 1,645. So yeah, that's down in the chart right there.
So we had the total within 2012 would be 81, which is surprisingly low. And then what it is in 2015, we had about 1,245, as they said before, which is a surprising increase in the 3 years that actually happened. Wait, actually, 1 sec. Yeah, 3 years. They have unchecked numbers. That's the only thing, is that this is only just like a sample of it, but what it is that since there's no natural predators to even predate on them, they have a better chance of living. They're young to live, so they can grow exponentially. It's the same thing with the deer population as you see here, where you see is that, you see like bunch of deer now everywhere, and you can never really explain mine. Like if you were like a child here, you see a very little amount of deer, but then you go around like right now, there's a lot of them, and that's more for unchecked predation. It's since there's no natural predators for them, is that they're able to have their young live throughout to adulthood without any real chance of getting eaten.
And we were talking about the food chain before. They are affecting the food chain, and even fishermen are gonna start to run into problems where the fish that they want to catch, like tuna, aren't gonna be able to catch as much because the lionfish are eating all of the fish that the tuna would eat. So.
Commercial fishermen are not fishing for lionfish.
Yes, commercial fishermen are not fishing for lionfish because there's not a demand for it. So that's why BIOS is really trying to get local businesses to cook lionfish and eat it, so that we have. Yeah, there is.
Solution is let's make it profitable.
Yeah, there's no solution to completely wipe them out. They're growing. Yeah, and any ocean life. With environmentally wise, our planet is heating up at such a fast pace that a lot of the environments can't adapt as fast. So it is really being destructive to different environments, like the corals who are expelling their algae. And those corals are home to a lot of different fish and their food sources. So the global warming is at a point where it's just happening so fast that a lot of these organisms can't adapt fast enough. And we're seeing decrease in different species as well as extinction and endangered species more often.
That would actually be, if I remember correctly, the carbon dioxide intake within the water itself. As most people like to think, is that most of the CO2 will be within the atmosphere itself. But what it is that most of it is actually being absorbed from the water. As you see, it's a lot of CO2 is now living within it, which causes it problems within fish and coral, since most fish have to have like a natural balance within them. They're very sensitive in a sense. Is that you really can't put like a saltwater fish from like Maine and waters from Bermuda, because then the entire pH levels, salinity, everything like that would cause it to have a discomfort and then die. It's the CO2 levels is causing a lot of discomfort with a lot of the animals as well. Mostly you see within the coral, as you see with bleaching, since the CO2 itself is having is absorbing
Caitlin wants
sunlight.
to add something over here. Sorry, are you done?
Oh.
Yeah, Caitlin will have another speaker. She knows some stuff too. She learned.
Well, I learned that a lot of the shellfish, they can't grow their shell as fast because of the CO2. They can't adapt as quickly. What? Yeah, it won't be as tough either, so.
Yeah, and the chemicals, the carbon dioxide is being absorbed as the water, and there's chemical reactions that originally would help make the shell with the calcium carbonate. The ions and the different chemicals are attaching to the carbon dioxide coming into the water, so there's not as much for the animals to connect to and to make their shells.
Okay, so the deeper you go, the higher the salinity is. Who had salinity?
The deeper you go, the less the salinity. Oh, the
I
higher.
know,
Yeah,
it's on my
higher.
graph.
Yeah, because of the evaporation. Did you want to learn?
Who had salinity? It's on my graph.
This far. Okay, so there's more salinity towards the shallow waters because of evaporation. So the deeper you go, there's less salinity, so it's positive correlation there.
Okay. Well, they actually mentioned that when they would spear the lionfish, they mentioned that they noticed that the lionfish are starting to pick up on, them coming at them with the spear. Like they said in the beginning, they would hold their spear up and the lionfish would literally look at them and not move at all, not do anything. Like, they had no idea. But the more and more this is going to go on, they're going to figure it out. And so I think that's why they're hiding more often, because they're starting to realize that we're here to kill them, not to be their friend. So I think that's why they're starting to hide from us.
So they know something.
Yeah, they're smart.
They're learning faster than the animals that they're eating, which
Yeah.
is really interesting, the behavioral wise. Yeah.
But another fish that we tend to be fearful are the barracudas, which they have in Bermuda. And I learned that, like, we think the barracudas are always out to get us, but they actually use us as a hunting tactic. So they hide behind us to try to see what fish they're going to catch. I just wanted to add a little fun fact there for you guys.
So I am not really into math or science, and being able to do this program just like with everyone else, it was such an amazing opportunity, and being able to take away what I learned, it brings it far past the classroom. I just can't even, we all can say this, that like we learned so much that you didn't even think you would even be able to learn. Studying science and all that stuff, to me, it wasn't very appealing, but the things I've learned and the stuff that we did and the experiences we had, like, it really made me enjoy school. I never really did, and I just got so many opportunities to be with amazing people, and we all got to do so many fun things, and I would recommend this to anyone and everyone, because if I didn't come, I would have to be taking these classes next semester, and I'd probably be dreading it, but I loved every minute of it. We had an amazing time, so I just tell everyone to go on this trip if they can. So
I feel like it's very different when you're actually doing something hands-on, because I just feel like for me, like, I remember it that much more. So I'll always remember this trip, and it was great, and we had great teachers that knew a lot about their subjects, so it was good.
The way we were learning things was so fun. Like, I have never taken in so much information and had such a good time doing so. Like, I genuinely forgot for a moment, not because we were having fun doing whatever we wanted, but because the way we learned things, it was so interesting. Like, I found myself asking myself, like, well, why does this organism do that? Or, like, I found myself to be so interested in what was going on, like, subconsciously. Like, I wasn't, it's so different from looking at a piece of paper and memorizing definitions or formulas. Like, it was amazing to take in so much information and not even have to force myself to, memorize all of it. Or I was genuinely curious about what I was learning, and it was awesome.
I didn't realize that I would care as much as I do now about the ocean and the environment. So I would have to say, like, yes, it's great to get the science class and the credit out of the way, but it's just now I can take so much away from this experience, and I'm really grateful for that.
I want to continue to study ocean life, and that's what I want to do with my life. I would love to be a part of any of the programs they had, like the lionfish program, or collecting the data to see how climate change is, what's it affecting, and how we can combat it. So this Bermuda trip definitely was a great experience, and I don't regret it at all. I'm so glad I had this opportunity, and I hope that in the future this program runs again so other people can have opportunities and help them decide what they want to do with their life.
My favorite part will always have to be snorkeling. I am a big avid swimmer. I've always been a swimmer my entire life. I always loved fish, as I am the other biology major here. Shout outs right here. Booyah. So we're the science ones, but it's always interesting to be able to collect the various data, study species that live within there, and just seeing how organisms be into existence to begin with. There's always been a great fascination with me.
I kind of had the same motivation that Caitlin did. Like, I needed a science, and I thought, what better way it would just be so much more fun to go to Bermuda than just take a regular environmental science class just at Brookdale. So it was definitely a memorable experience for sure.
Study abroad at Brookdale.